The Bogosity Podcast, early and ad-free. Become a subscriber at Patreon, Subscribestar, or Discord. Use the links at donate.bogosity.tv.
Welcome to the Bogosity Podcast for the week of May the 25th, 2025. The podcast that went out for milk and never came back. This is your host, Shane Killian. Next weekend is the 5th weekend in the month, so that means no podcast. Let's Platonize the news of the bogus. Well, the Trump administration has done something major that I agree with, even if for the wrong reasons. They're getting the U.S. out of the World Health Organization. As we've covered several times on this podcast, and as I've also covered independently on my channel so much there's a separate playlist about it, the WHO is an organization of politics and corruption that has pushed pseudoscience, obstructed medical advances, and acted for the benefit of no one but ambulance-chasing lawyers wanting a reason to sue deep pockets. Cue the screeching of the media. We'll just look at Time magazine, but trust me, there are plenty doing far worse. They start off by calling it, quote, a move that experts say makes the U.S. and other countries less safe from infectious diseases and other public health threats. And then they quote Brown University's Dr. Ashish Jha saying, quote, for Americans, it may not be obvious immediately what the impact will be, but given the world we live in and all of the factors that are driving more disease outbreaks, America cannot fight them alone. We need an effective WHO to not just keep the world safe from these diseases, but to keep Americans safe from these diseases. Well, wonderful job you did in COVID, wasn't it? As longtime listeners know, the WHO failed at this very core function, beginning by denying that the threat even existed, whitewashing China's mishandling of the virus when it could have been stopped in its tracks, even praising China for stonewalling the release of the virus's genome for 17 days. They denied human-to-human transmission of COVID until late January 2020, even after Chinese doctors knew better, and praised China's openness even as they were keeping WHO doctors from inspecting the affected areas. Whereas countries such as Taiwan, who was denied WHO membership in 2015 and who also ignored the WHO COVID recommendations, did quite well with one of the lowest per capita infection rates. On the other hand, countries such as Italy, who followed them to the letter, saw the disease blow through their populations horribly. By the way, Jha was the White House COVID-19 response coordinator. Make of that what you will. Dr. Tom Frieden said, quote, the bottom line is that withdrawing from the WHO makes Americans and the world less safe. Yeah, less safe from having literally every substance in the universe listed as carcinogenic so that lawyers can sue companies. Less safe from fear-mongering over cell phones, Wi-Fi, and 5G causing cancer. Less safe from fear-mongering about vaping, aspartame, red meat, and glyphosate. So, how is getting us out of the WHO going to make us less safe? Getting out also saves enormous amount of taxpayer dollars. In 2022 to 2023, the U.S. provided $1.3 billion to the WHO. But of course, without going over even a fraction of what we just summarized, they quote the apologists such as Paul Spiegel of Johns Hopkins saying, quote, the WHO can be improved. There are inefficiencies like with all organizations, but by pulling out and removing the huge amount of money that the U.S. gives, you're not allowing the WHO to make reforms. You're hobbling it. Look, baby, I can do better. Take me back. I can change. Really, baby, I can. Yeah, once again, if your only response matches perfectly with battered woman syndrome, color me unimpressed. No, sorry, The WHO had one job to do, and when SARS-CoV-2 came along and presented a disease pretty much tailor-made for their exact raison d'etre, they failed catastrophically. You don't reward failure by paying them. You punish failure by taking money away. But Time went on to fearmonger about influenza, saying that the U.S. now won't be able to develop seasonal flu vaccines, as if there's no other way to get information on changing influenza strains. Without the WHO getting the direct word of God, or however they think they do it. As opposed to, getting it from published science that's available to anyone. Don't we already have a CDC that's supposed to be doing that? Of course, they failed just as badly, if not worse. And if there's another pandemic, Time says that the U.S. wouldn't be able to get timely information about those outbreaks without the WHO, who completely obstructed information about even the existence of SARS-CoV-2 for months. Because, the WHO is completely non-political, as they went on to quote several apologists claiming. Sorry, no. The possibilities of a new pandemic or other increasing health concerns are a great reason to get rid of the WHO, because they proved conclusively that they're just not up to the job. Someone does a bad job, you fire them. You don't rely on them.
Sometimes you just have to stomp some skulls. From the mind of Mr. Dapperton, a game for the ages. In a world where a race of undead furries tries to take over the world's nuclear arsenal, one man must stop them. But which man? You choose. The Orange Overlord.
Ow, my ear!
Bernie Slanders. Debate Dominator.
My kippa's ruined.
Or Joe Sleepy.
Build me back.
And of course, Mr. Fancy Pants himself.
Forget those losers. You can get the Gold Edition and play as 4 more characters, including me, the Spooky Spaceman, along with Billionaire Brat, Professor Proof, and the easiest way to play, as Jesus himself.
7 complete different worlds, with more coming all the time. Full controller support. You can even get eaten by a worm and pooped out into a furry cathedral.
And don't forget that Gold Edition, where you can play the ultimate challenge, Devil's Doorstep.
This gory satirical adventure pulls no punches. You know you want this game. Go to links.bogosity.tv/skullstompers and play Skull Stompers now.
We want better cybersecurity. We want everyone to have better cybersecurity, but where is it more important than the Department of Defense? The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification is there to make sure the DoD's cybersecurity is up to snuff. The DoD and its contractors are required to achieve level 2 of the 3-level certification if they want to keep their contracts, and that includes not only strict requirements for security and encryption, but also regular assessments and inspections. Okay, first hedge, they have 3 years to comply. I mean, seriously? Do you have any idea how much cybersecurity can change in 3 years? What if the standards change again? Are they always going to be 3 years behind the times? Especially since these are things that aren't difficult and they should have been doing the whole time anyway. This article says the companies are scrambling to make sure they reach the new requirements before they risk losing lucrative government contracts. Really? 3 years is scrambling? Am I to understand that contractors dealing with top secret contracts don't even have least privilege design? That's basic network design. You only give users access to what they need and no more. I was designing those systems back in the 90s. This is how I'm imagining it. We need to up our security. Okay, let's change the password. And they post a notice in the break room saying, the new password to our ancient mainframe is password 124. Scary. What? You mean every single user needs their own password? God, I hate government. A study from the software design company Deltek said, quote, "After years of delays and light enforcement, 2025 marks a turning point, and those that have been in compliance will see a competitive advantage." Great. Maybe one of them is a NetWare 3 network I designed and set up in the late 90s. Sounds like they'd be ahead of the curve. Okay, listen up, folks. Consider a wall. That is a wall between the user and the resources on your network. You'll remove blocks from the wall just in those areas they need to reach through and access. If you were one of my students in the early 2000s, you'd have learned this, and you're already at this comparative advantage. You're welcome. By the way, that works for applications too. Network services only need access to the people and data they need to interact with. Block them from everything else. Deltek says that 55% of contractors will have a CMMC requirement, with 43% being likely to need a level 2 standard and 34% the most restrictive level 3. When they're all things that any corporate network should be doing anyway. Ransomware was the biggest concern of contractors, with 57% ranking it as their biggest worry. Good! They should be worried, and they should be implementing the well-published and standardized protections for it. 56% of them were also worried because they were planning to implement an AI-enhanced platform, and they were worried about issues with AI adoption. Deltek said, quote, "AI governance emerged as a top IT challenge, but as it was new to the list of IT operations challenges this year and will need to be monitored in the coming years to gain meaningful insights. My advice? Don't worry about implementing AI for now. Secure your network first. Then when you're ready, implement the AI as you would any other user or service. Highly restricted, with access to only the things and people it needs to, and with threat monitoring to keep it in check. Get it right the first time at the design level, and then follow those design protocols, and everything else will fall into place." The scary part is the knowledge that they apparently haven't been doing that.
If you're on the Wi-Fi in a coffee shop or hotel, anyone on that network can get your traffic. Do you really trust all of those strangers? For that matter, do you really trust your ISP? A VPN can protect you from prying eyes, disguise your location, and even foil government censors. It's essential in this day and age, so go to vpn.bogosity.tv and you'll be taken to BoxPN. Starting at just $2.99 a month, you can get unlimited high-speed connections to VPN servers all over the world, and they don't log connections, so your privacy is assured. Traveling abroad, just VPN home, and don't worry about what those other governments are doing. Back at home, stop your ISP from traffic shaping and messing with the quality internet access you're paying good money for. You can connect from multiple machines at once, including your smartphone or tablet, and it supports all the secure standards, including OpenVPN and SSTP. Bypass censors and surveillance with your own secure VPN connection. Go to vpn.bogosity.tv.
You're going to wonder why this next segment isn't biggest Bogon emitter. For that, all I have to say is just wait. Anyway, you remember that interview special counsel Robert Hur did of Joe Biden, where he found out that Biden totally broke the law regarding classified documents, but couldn't be prosecuted because he was too mentally absent? The Democrats and the news media engaged in all sorts of apologetics about it, but now the recording of the interview has been released, and if anything, it's worse than we thought. He couldn't even remember things like what year Trump was elected or even what year his son Beau died. He slurred words, he muttered, there were long pauses as he struggled to think of what to say next, and it all completely answers the question of why the White House refused to release the recordings last year and said the transcripts were enough. Because the transcripts don't reflect the sort of thing I just mentioned. For example, one part of the transcript reads, "In 2017, Beau had passed and, this is personal, the genesis of the book and the title Promise Me Dad was I know you're all close with your sons and daughters, but Bo was like my right arm and Hunt was my left. Now listen to the audio.
In 2017, Bo had passed, and this is personal. The genesis of the book and the title, Promise Me Dad, was I know you're all close with your sons and daughters, but Bo was like my right arm, and that was my left.
You get the idea. It's actually painful to listen to. But Biden spokesperson Kelly Sully said, quote, "The transcripts were released by the Biden administration more than a year ago. The audio does nothing but confirm what is already public." Yeah, you decide for yourself. He also needed help with basic terms like fax machine and poster board. But on the other hand, he did seem to be in the present. He understood the questions even if he struggled with the answers and made jokes and sharp responses to a lot of what was said. But it still took her more than 2 hours to determine how those documents ended up scattered all over the place in personal desks and file cabinets and everything else after Biden left office. And when you had admissions of intent like this,
I don't know if it'd be subject to reporting, but I wanted to hang on to it just for posterity's sake.
Biden's attorney, Bob Bauer, interjected with,
I just really would like to avoid, for the purpose of a clean record, getting into speculative areas. When the president responded and said, "I don't recall intending to keep this memo," you then said, "Well, might you have thought it was important to keep him," whatever. And he said, "Well, I guess I could have." His recollection, as I understand it, is he does not recall specifically intending to keep this memo after he left the vice presidency. And I want these questions to be as clearly answered and recorded on the transcript as possible.
I think we should take a break.
That second voice was co-counsel Mark Crickbaum, and another attorney, Ed Siskel, and his deputy, Rachel Cotton, also jumped in to help the president as he tried to remember words or dates or stop him from giving longer answers that might incriminate him. Kamala Harris said at the time, quote, "The way that the president's demeanor in that report was characterized could not be more wrong on the facts and clearly politically motivated, gratuitous. We should expect that there would be a higher level of integrity than what we saw." She was right, just targeted at the wrong side of the aisle. Of course, the news media went to great lengths to point out that at least Biden was cooperating, unlike Trump, who blah, blah, blah. Of course, they're declining to point out that Trump was president, and under the Constitution, those rules do not and cannot apply to him. Biden was just VP at the time, and even had classified files from his time as a senator. Can you believe they're still trying to gaslight us at a time when we can listen to the audio for ourselves? I want to tell you about the eyeglasses I've been wearing for years. As people can see on my videos, I have a very strong prescription, which makes glasses more expensive, especially when I need computer glasses, reading glasses, prescription sunglasses, and most expensively, progressive lenses for general everyday wear. To save money while still getting quality glasses, I get them from Firmoo. In fact, I just got a pair of progressives with high-index aspherical lenses and a nice pair of frames my wife loves for just over $100. It would have been $500 to get them through my eye doctor. Not only do they look good, the glasses are durable. I've worn many pairs for several years without problems. All orders come with a 30-day return policy, a 3-month warranty, and one-on-one customer service. Go to Firmoo, that's FIRMOO.Bogosity.TV anytime you need quality glasses at a low price. Once again, that's Firmoo.Bogosity.TV. And now it's time to psychologize this week's biggest Bogon emitter. So we haven't talked about the Karen Reed trial because there's been plenty of coverage of it elsewhere, but oh my God, talk about corrupt people, corrupt prosecutor, corrupt judge, the whole shebang. Any one of those could have gotten biggest Bogon emitter if I felt it needed any more exposure at all. But this Shanon Burgess guy, are you even serious? So to quickly recap, this is the second trial. The first trial ended in a mistrial after the jury hung. They had actually acquitted on 2 charges but hung on the third, but Judge Beverly Canone put it down as a mistrial for all 3, which is all sorts of wrong, but anyway, here we are. That means we have not only the normal discovery you go through with a trial, but all of the testimony and evidence of the first trial, which is a problem if it all falls apart on you. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead on the lawn of another Boston police officer, Brian Albert. Albert wasn't charged or even investigated with the killing, which is another kind of all sorts of wrong. The Alberts and the McCabe's are basically a crime family, and the judge has some sort of relationship to them because they've been known to call her Auntie Bev. And yet, she refused to recuse herself over it because the corrupt judges never do. Seriously, we don't have anywhere near enough time to cover all of her corruption, the corruption of the prosecutor, and the corruption of the Boston police. Just check the copious coverage by various lawtubers. O'Keefe's wounds were a blow to the back of the head, a laceration on his right temple, and a bunch of cuts to his right arm. Prosecutors say this clearly means that Karen Reed hit him with her car. Yeah, picture how that's supposed to work. She supposedly backed into him, hit him with her taillight, which shattered and exploded all over the lawn and sent O'Keefe flying 30 feet, with no other bruises or evidence of blunt force trauma. Apparently, the taillight hit him in the head and then exploded, causing the cuts on his arm. One of the prosecution's experts is Shanon Burgess, who, a month into the trial, is trying to change his story. See, cell phone data from Reed and O'Keefe, as well as telemetry from Reed's SUV, don't support any kind of impact. There's a 3-point turn, but it occurs at the wrong time to have hit O'Keefe. So now, Burgess is changing everything to say that the clocks were wrong and everything does line up somehow. We might hit on that, but what really gets it for him is lying about his so-called credentials when questioned on it by defense attorney Robert Alessi. Alessi had wanted to voir dire him in the absence of the jury, but Auntie Bev said, nah, you don't get to do that. So all of this is in front of the jury.
It says Bachelor of General Science in Mathematics and Business Administration, University of Alabama - Birmingham, Alabama - currently pursuing. Did I read that correctly?
You did read that correctly.
So in those 2 exhibits, your 2 CVs in front of you, am I correct that the first one is November 2024 and the second one is April 2025?
Let me see. Yes, that appears to be correct.
In both of those CVs, you indicate that you have not yet earned a bachelor's degree.
That is correct.
And you certainly have not earned a Bachelor of Science degree in any educational field according to those 2 CVs, right?
Correct.
And in fact, as you sit here today, you do not possess any bachelor's degree.
Correct.
Geez, I've got more credentials than this guy does, and I have an art degree!
That is the bio page that's published on Aperture's website, correct?
That is what it appears to be, yes.
And you do not have a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Business Administration, do you?
No, I do not.
Wow, dude just made up references. And it gets worse.
Were you notified within the last 72 hours that someone from the defense accessed your publicly available or viewed your publicly available LinkedIn account?
No, I was not aware.
Are you aware that within the last 72 hours that hyperlink on Aperture's official website was disabled?
No, I was not aware.
Are you aware that now if you try to go on that link that you can't, that it's disabled?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Do you know whether anyone from Aperture directed someone within Aperture to disable your LinkedIn account within the last 72 hours?
No, I'm not.
Have you spoken to anybody at Aperture about your LinkedIn account?
No, I have not.
Folks, juries are not stupid. As much as you just went, yeah, right, to that exchange, so are the jurors. And folks, if you look at the video, Burgess is beat red through this whole exchange in a way that he wasn't on direct. He knows he's been caught.
And under education, it says University of Alabama at Birmingham. It's got a little UAB acronym there. And it says Bachelor of Science, B period, S period, comma, Applied Mathematics and Scientific Computation, 2016-2018. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
That's not correct, is it?
No, it's not correct.
And you do not hold a Bachelor of Science in Applied Mathematics and Scientific Computation from the University of Alabama at Birmingham, do you?
I do not.
Man, how's he going to worm this way out of this?
With the caveat that my understanding is people look at your post, not specifically the profile information.
Are you actually serious? You're wanting us to believe that people on LinkedIn just look at the posts, not the CV, and therefore it's okay to lie?
And as you sit here today, that page is still live on your LinkedIn, correct?
Correct.
You wouldn't let somebody put a CV up and out to the public without you reviewing it, would you, sir?
So there are other staff members that do review and update CVs.
But you're the only one who's going to know whether what's on it is accurate or not, correct?
Unless I explain that to them, yes.
So either way, either you prepared it yourself or you interacted with somebody and explained it and collaborated with them to make sure it was right to the best of your ability, correct?
Correct.
So this is a third example of a document that incorrectly states that you have a Bachelor of Science when you do not possess that degree, correct?
It has errors or outdated information, correct.
Well, when you say outdated, how is it that you can call a date outdated next to something that you don't possess?
I don't understand your question.
Oh, come on, Burgess. You know exactly what he's asking. And the jury does too. You're not endearing yourself to them. How could this possibly be any worse?
It says Bachelor of General Science in Mathematics and Business Administration. Do you see that, sir?
I do.
Are you aware that there's no degree at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, called a Bachelor of General Science in Mathematics and Business Administration?
Yes, I am.
Oh, for the love of Mike. Maybe, just maybe, if Auntie Bev weren't a corrupt piece of crap and had allowed the defense to voir dire him, this might not have had to come in front of a jury. This segment is going long, but in the interest of pointing out something no one else is, since the law-tubers understandably don't know much about networking, let's get a tiny bit into his claims.
So I looked at when the three-point turn occurred within the iPhone data and the location data in reference to that clock, and then looked at the same three-point turn event as it was recorded from the text stream and the Lexus clock. So in order to reconcile the difference in those clocks, we are comparing the clock times for the event from each device and moving or adjusting the clock for one compared to the other.
In other words, we started with the evidence that these two clocks matched to prove they were the same event. When it turns out they weren't, we just moved the clocks to match on the assumption that they were the same event. And that means that one clock or the other had to have drifted by somewhere between 21 and 29 seconds. He claims to have made that estimation based on numerous, quote, scholarly journals and studies, none of which were in evidence, of course. All right, let me lay down some facts for you. An iPhone is going to continuously sync to Apple's NTP time server as long as it's connected to a network. NTP does continuous polling of clocks, and the more polling there is during a certain time interval, the more accurate the clock. Typically, iPhones update their time every 1 to 2 minutes and use enough polling intervals to achieve an accuracy within 50 milliseconds of UTC. The Lexus is going to use the highly accurate clocks on GPS satellites. Due to the incredibly time-sensitive nature of GPS location, those clocks are set to within 10 nanoseconds of UTC. Typical GPS receivers can therefore easily set their clocks within 100 nanoseconds of UTC and are updated every time location data is polled. So that'll be the case with each and every one of those GPS readings. None of those devices recorded anything unusual with regards to network access, such as loss of access or atypical congestion or a weak GPS signal, at least nothing that's been brought forward. And if the Lexus doesn't sync its time using GPS, well, that's something that should have been pointed out too. It would be incredibly rare, therefore, for an iPhone and a GPS receiver to be as much as 1 second apart, and ridiculous to think they'd ever be more than 5 seconds apart without some extreme conditions present. And 21 to 29 seconds? That strains all credulity. But in order to correct that, he has to use much more inaccurate location polling data, which is limited in resolution since polling is done every so often. Of course, Alessi has also demonstrated that Burgess didn't even understand the difference between gigabits and gigabytes, so that lets you know his degree of technological prowess. Let's just get this one parting shot from Alessi to sum it all up.
Are you familiar with the phrase academic dishonesty?
Yes, I am.
So all of that makes Shanon Burgess this week's biggest Bogon emitter.
Do you have children, or nieces or nephews? Are you homeschooling, or just want to counter some of the socialist indoctrination most children get in school? If so, go to Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins, and you'll be taken to a website where you can get some great books for elementary-age children. The Tuttle Twins books are books about liberty and free market economics that include children's versions of Bastiat's The Law, Leonard Read's I, Pencil, and Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, as well as books about the Federal Reserve and how regulations protect business cronies. They'll learn about the harm caused by eminent domain, or regulations passed in the name of safety, and fundamental concepts of liberty. And as you can see from the sample pages on the website, they're all easy to read and nicely illustrated. They're just $9.99 a piece, or get a special discount as well as free bonuses when you purchase all 5. You can even buy in bulk to donate to schools and local libraries. So get the Tuttle Twins books at Bogosity.tv/TuttleTwins.
And now let's undiscombobulationize this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. And this week he goes to the New York Times for just not getting basic ideas like context or being able to do basic things like think. I mean, no change there then. So we've covered stories about how teachers don't like that students are using ChatGPT to basically cheat and do the work for them. This article is a very credulous look at the opposite. Students at Northeastern University complaining that their professors are using it, one going so far as to demand her tuition back. An easily triggered dumbass named Ella Stapleton saw on Canvas that her professor was using ChatGPT and then texted a friend saying, quote, "Did you see the notes he put on Canvas? He made it with ChatGPT. He's telling us not to use it, and then he's using it himself." Turns out, the professor was using it to format his PowerPoint slides. I mean, I could get it if he were using it to grade their papers or something. That's the kind of crucial difference that, if Stapleton doesn't understand it, she doesn't deserve a degree. By the way, no professor ever tells them never to use ChatGPT. They tell you there are right ways and wrong ways of using it. Don't use it to do your work for you. Don't use it as a hotline to truth. Don't cheat, that sort of thing. But as much as Ms. Stapleton should know better, that goes triple for Kashmir Hill, the so-called journalist who wrote this. I hesitate to dignify it by calling it an article. Just listen to this paragraph, quote, "But oh, how the tables have turned. Now students are complaining on sites like Rate My Professors about their instructors' over-reliance on AI and scrutinizing course materials for words ChatGPT tends to overuse, like crucial and delve. In addition to calling out hypocrisy, they make a financial argument. They are paying, often quite a lot, to be taught by humans, not an algorithm that they too could consult for free." Do you honestly think that's what's going on here, Hill? That they're getting exactly what they could get by asking ChatGPT? Your reminder that the New York Times is currently suing OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT. Yeah, no conflict of interest there. English professor Paul Shovlin pointed out, as this article says about 2/3 of the way down, long after their typical unthinking readership has gotten bored and moved on to the latest TikTok craze, that there are long-standing practices of using third-party content for things like lesson plans and case studies, and this is no different. He said that to say a professor is, quote, some kind of monster for using AI to generate slides, quote, is, to me, ridiculous. Seriously, it'd be like a student complaining that a math teacher used a calculator. Well, we're not allowed to use it. Why should they? Because they already know the material. So what's the difference if ChatGPT makes a slide or the professor makes the same slide using something like draw.io to make the diagrams, except that the latter requires a lot more time and effort that the professor could better put to other uses? Northeastern said that Stapleton is not going to get her money back. Good on them for not caving. And shame on the New York Times and Kashmir Hill for posting in the headline, the subheading, and the first 2/3 of the article something she clearly knew to be false at the end of the article. So all of that makes the New York Times this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. Well, that wraps up this Night That Nincompoop by Noon Tomorrow edition of the Bogosity Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please go to donate.bogosity.tv for several ways to support, and discord.bogosity.tv to join the discussion. Subscribe at the Discord, Patreon, or Subscribestar, and you can listen early and ad-free. Thank you for listening. Remember, no podcast next week. We'll see you in June. Until then, here's a quote from Richard Feynman. The theoretical broadening, which comes from having many humanities subjects on the campus, is offset by the general dopiness of the people who study these things. The Bogosity Podcast is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License.
Bogosity.